The river had taken the bridge an hour before midnight, and by the time she heard him, she had already been on the bank twice and seen nothing and gone back inside, cursing the storm for the games it played with sound. The third time, the cry came again from the water itself, low and close and unmistakable, the noise of a man with the last of his strength in him, and Tess Halsey set down the lantern and unhooked her shawl and went down the slope without thinking, because thought at such a moment was a luxury her father had taught her to do without. He was caught between two stones at the river's elbow, where the current bent hard and the willows reached out into the water like fingers. She could see him only when the lightning came, a dark shape twisting against the flood, one hand still raised, the other gripping a willow root that was tearing loose from the bank an inch at a time. The roar of the water was very great. She did not bother shouting. She went into the water up to her thighs and braced herself against a stone and reached, and when his hand came down across her wrist, she took it with both of hers and she pulled the way she had pulled at a forge bellows since she was 9 years old, with her back and her legs and the whole patient weight of her, and the river gave him up by inches. He was heavy with water, and twice she nearly went down with him, and twice she did not. She got him onto the bank and turned him on his side, and beat the water out of him with the flat of her hand until he coughed properly. And then she lay back in the wet grass for a moment with the rain in her face and let herself shake. "You will get up," she said to him after a moment, in the voice she used to the cart horse when it had put its foot wrong, "or you will die here, and I would prefer the first." He got up, not steadily, and not at once, and she had to take half his weight against her shoulder for the quarter-mile to the cottage, but he got up, and he walked, and that was the first thing she knew about him, that he had the kind of will that would, when called, answer. The cottage was a low stone house behind the forge, with a door that opened directly into the kitchen and a fire she had banked an hour before. Her father stood up from the settle when she came in, and he took in the man and her and the river still on both of them, and he did not waste a word. "Bed," Jonas Halsey said. "The press in the box room. I will see to the horses." There were no horses. She did not say so. She got the man to the small bed in the box room, and between the two of them, they got him out of the soaked coat and the soaked boots, and Jonas brought hot stones wrapped in wool from beside the hearth and laid them at his feet and at his hands, and Tess put her ear to his chest and counted the breaths against the long second hand of her mother's clock on the kitchen mantel. He was alive. He would be alive in an hour. Beyond an hour she would not promise. He was unconscious for 2 days. On the second night his fever broke, and on the third morning he opened his eyes and looked at the rafters of a blacksmith's cottage and did not move for a long time, and Tess, who had brought in his washing water and a bowl of broth and set them on the chair beside the bed, sat down and waited. He turned his head at last. His eyes were gray and very tired. He looked at her with no expression she could read, the way a man looks at something he has not yet decided how to understand. "Where am I?" he said. "Halsey's forge, beneath the bend. The river took the bridge 2 nights ago and very nearly took you with it." "Whose house?" "Mine, my father's. Mine after." He considered that. He looked at the rafters again, at the iron pot-hook on the wall, at the small window with its plain unglazed shutter pulled back to let in the morning light. The light was thin, and the air smelled of wood smoke and bread. "What is your name?" he said. "Tess Halsey." "Tess." He said it once as though learning the shape of it. Then, after a pause, she would think about often afterward. "Mine is John." She nodded. She did not ask him John what. She had learned, working at her father's elbow at the forge, that some men gave their names slowly and some all at once, and the slow ones were not always to be mistrusted. Sometimes they were simply men who had been asked their names too many times by people who wanted something other than the name. She brought him the broth and propped his head on her hand and fed him a spoonful at a time, and he took it patiently, and when he had taken 6 spoonfuls, he closed his eyes and slept again, and she watched him sleep, and she noticed, because she always noticed, that his hands lying loose on the coverlet were smooth as a gentleman's. She did not ask him about it. She set the bowl back on the tray and went out and closed the door softly behind her. He slept the day. He woke towards evening and was strong enough to sit up against the pillow, and Tess brought him a clean shirt that had been her father's and was a poor fit but a clean one, and she helped him into it without ceremony, the way she would have helped any sick neighbor, and he submitted to the helping without ceremony, the way an honest man does when he has not the strength to be courteous in any other way. When she had buttoned the shirt to his collarbone, she stepped back and looked at him. She did not answer. There was no answer that would not say more than she had thought through. She brought him soup and bread, and he ate, and afterward she sat by the fire in the kitchen and listened through the half-open door for the sound of his breathing settling into sleep again, and she did not name to herself what she was listening for. In the morning he could stand. He was unsteady, and he sat down again hard against the bedpost, but he could stand, and Tess told him so, and he agreed with the assessment, and then he sat in the chair by the window for the rest of the day with one of her father's books on his lap. It was a small bound volume of Cowper that her mother had given Jonas in the first year of their marriage. Tess saw him read it. She saw the small movement of his eyes across the page. She saw him turn a page with the particular quickness of a man who reads often, and she filed this observation beside the smoothness of his hands and said nothing. Her mother had been a vicar's daughter, educated above her station and married below it, and Tess had been her mother's pupil from the time she could hold a pen. Her mother had taught her Latin in the kitchen between the kneading of the bread and the salting of the meat, and a little Greek when the bread was rising, and the names of the stars when there was no money for candles. And she had taught her, above all of these, to keep what she knew to herself when the keeping of it was the kindness. She had died of a fever in the winter of Tess's 15th year. The books had stayed. So had the habit of keeping. So when the stranger called John, read Cowper by the window of her father's cottage and said nothing about it, neither did she. He stayed a fortnight. By the end of the first week, he could walk to the gate and back without stopping. By the end of the second, he could walk to the river and stand looking at the place where the bridge had been and the place where she had gone in after him, and he did this often. And Tess, watching him from the kitchen window with her hands deep in flour, thought he looked like a man making a list of debts he intended to pay. On the 8th day, Jonas asked him at supper how he came to be on the road in such a storm, and the stranger called John set down his spoon and said only that he had been riding alone, that he often did, that his horse had been at the bridge when it went, and that he had been thrown clear and into the water, and had not the least idea what had become of the animal. He said it plainly. He did not embroider. Jonas nodded and said it was a hard country in a storm, and the matter was let go. But that night, in the small back room he had taken to using, when the box room grew cold, the stranger called John, sat down at Jonas's writing desk with a piece of paper and a hand-sharpened pen, and he wrote a letter, and he sealed it with a wax stub from the kitchen drawer and a thumbprint instead of a seal, because he had no seal here. In the morning, he asked Tess if she would carry it to the receiving office at the crossroads when she went next to market. She said she would. She took the letter and put it in her basket without looking at the direction, and she walked the 4 miles to the crossroads and gave it to the boy who took the post, and she walked home. And she did not look at the direction on the way, because looking at it would have been a kind of asking, and she had not been asked to ask. He wrote 2 more letters in the second week. She carried them too. The hand on the direction grew bolder by the third. She still did not look. What she did look at was him. She could not help it. He sat by the fire in the evenings with her father and talked about the price of corn and the failure of the bridge and what the parish would do about it. And he spoke like a man who knew something of estates and the running of them, who knew, for instance, that the bridge was the responsibility of the freeholder on the eastern bank and not the parish at all. And once he almost corrected Jonas on a point of common law concerning rights of way and stopped himself half a syllable into the saying. Tess saw the stop. She did not comment. He read the Cowper through and started on the small cloth-bound Virgil that had been her mother's, and he read it in the original without moving his lips, which was a thing Tess had only ever seen her mother do. He never asked her about herself. That was what struck her most. Every man she had ever known who had taken an interest in her had begun by asking about her father, the forge, her mother, her circumstances, her prospects, and he asked none of it. He spoke to her when they spoke, about the things in front of them, the soup, the rain, the swallow that had got into the rafters, the question of whether a man could mend his own coat well enough to wear it in company. And Tess, who had been asked so often what her father did and what her mother had been, and whether she could expect anything from her uncle in Manchester, found in his not asking a kind of peace she had not known she had been wanting. She did not know she had begun to love him Until the morning he said he was strong enough to walk to the village. He said it at breakfast. He said it quite plainly, as he said most things, that he had business that could no longer wait, business that would, in the end, require him to be in London for the autumn sitting of the House of Lords, and that he was already late beginning the unwinding of it. And Tess, putting down her cup, felt the small giving way somewhere behind her sternum, the slow movement of a thing she had been holding upright by not looking at it. She did not let it show. She nodded and said that her father would lend him what he had, and that the carter went up to the great road at noon and would take him as far as the post. He looked at her for a long moment. She thought he might say something. He did not. He only nodded back and finished his bread and went out to the yard to bring in the wood, because he had taken to bringing in the wood without being asked. The carter took him at noon. Jonas had given him an old coat that did not fit, and the boots that had dried by the kitchen fire, and a few shillings he had refused at first and then accepted with a grace Tess noted. He stood by the cart with his hand on the rail and looked at her across the yard. "I will come back," he said, "within the week if I can. There are things I must tell you that I would rather tell you than send." "You owe me nothing," Tess said. "I owe you a great deal," he said, "but that is not why I am coming back." He climbed into the cart and the carter clicked at the horse, and they went out of the yard and turned at the crossroads and were gone. Tess stood at the gate until the dust had settled. Then she went inside and finished the washing she had begun before breakfast, and she did not weep because she did not weep. And her father, who came in from the forge for his dinner and looked at her once and looked away again, said nothing. It was 4 days. He came back on a horse that was not his, a country cob hired from the inn at the crossroads, and dressed in clothes that were not the old coat Jonas had given him. They were not grand. They were the plainest clothes a gentleman might keep: a dark coat well cut, a fresh linen shirt, boots that had been properly cleaned and not by him. He came into the yard at mid-morning, and Tess saw him from the kitchen window, and she came out wiping her hands on her apron. He stood at the gate. He did not come through it. He waited until she came to him, and then he said, with the same plainness she had grown used to, the only thing he could have said that would have made any of what followed bearable. "My name is Adrian Mowbray," he said. "I am the Duke of Sefton. I have known this the whole time. I told myself many things about why I did not say it sooner, and most of them were lies. The truth is that here, in your father's cottage, I was for a fortnight a man who was being looked after by a woman who treated me as a man, and I knew that the moment I said the other thing, the cottage would become a place where a duke was being looked after by a blacksmith's daughter, and I could not bear, until I had to have it become that. I have known for 2 days that I had to. I am sorry. I came as soon as I could come." He stopped. He did not look away from her. He had the courtesy not to look away. She did not speak at first. The yard was very quiet. Somewhere in the forge, her father's hammer struck and stopped and struck and stopped, the patient 3-stroke rhythm of a man who knew his daughter was at the gate and did not intend to interfere. "Get down off the horse," Tess said. "I will not shout at a man on horseback. It is undignified." He got down off the horse. He stood holding the rein, and the cob put its head down and began to crop at the grass at the foot of the gatepost. Tess looked at him. She felt the heat behind her face that she had felt twice before in her life, and on each occasion had been right to trust. "You let me wash your face," she said. "You let me cut your hair. You sat at my father's table and ate the bread I had baked, and you let me carry your letters to the receiving office in my market basket without telling me whose direction was on them. And you let me come to think of you as a man I knew, when you knew all the while that I knew nothing. That is the thing. The dukedom is nothing to me. I do not care for it. I do not even know what it should mean. But you stood on ground that was not level, and you did not say so. You let me speak to you as an equal, and I was not your equal, because I did not know what I did not know. That is what you did. That is what I cannot forgive in this present hour, and what I do not know whether I shall forgive in any." He did not argue. That was the part she would remember. He did not say, "But I felt I was your equal." He did not say, "But you were always equal to me." He stood with the rein in his hand and listened to her and did not argue. "I know," he said when she had finished. "I am not asking you to forgive me today. I am only telling you that I have come, and that I came myself, and that I will come back as often as you will receive me, until you have decided what you wish to do. If that is never, I will accept never." I had no right to your fortnight. I will have no right to your future I do not earn. You will not buy it, she said. No, nor send anyone to buy it for you. His face changed at that, only a little. Only at the corner of the mouth. No, I will see to that. See to it now, Tess said, before you come again. Whatever arrangement is being made on my behalf without my asking, undo it. There is one, he said. There is, my land agent. I will speak to him today. See that you do. She turned and went into the cottage, and she did not look back, and she closed the door behind her, and she sat down at the kitchen table and put her hands flat on the wood and did not move for a long time. Jonas came in from the forge after a while. He brought with him the smell of charcoal and hot iron and the cold air of the yard. He sat down opposite her. He is the Duke of Sefton, she said. I know. She looked at him. His coat the first night, Jonas said. The lining. There was a label sewn in, Bond Street. Not a label a man comes by accidentally, and not a label that goes with the rest of the coat he was in. I saw it when I was wringing it out. I have not lived all my life at a forge without learning what a gentleman's coat looks like inside. You said nothing. He had not yet said anything, Jonas said. I waited to see what he would say. He said his name was John. So he did. She put her hand to her mouth. She was angry still, and she would be angry for a long time, and there was no help for that. But beneath the anger she found, to her own surprise, a small, quiet thing that was not anger. Her father had known. Her father had known and had let her decide what she made of the stranger by the slow light of her own knowing, and he had given her that, as he had given her so many other patient things, and she would think about it later. But for the moment she only put her hand to her mouth and was quiet, and Jonas said no more. Mr. Sorrel came 2 days later, in a smart trap with a footman beside him, a thin, gray-faced man of perhaps 50, with a manner that was not unkind so long as nothing was being asked of his kindness. Miss Halsey, he said, I represent the Duke of Sefton. I have come on a small matter of arrangement. I'm sure you will understand. I'm sure I shall not, Tess said, but you may say what you have come to say. He said it. He spoke of a sum, of a settlement upon her father in recognition of the great service rendered, of a quiet remove to a place where she might begin again with means that would not have been available to her here, of the unfortunate prominence that an attachment would necessarily attract, and of the kindness it would be to all parties to make a clean settlement of the obligation in good time. Tess heard him out. When he had finished, she said very evenly, Mr. Sorrel, you have wasted your morning. We are not for sale, and your gentleman in question knows it perfectly well, which means you have come here without his authority. I will tell him so. Mr. Sorrel recovered, said something about misunderstandings, but Tess had already turned away, and Jonas had come out of the forge with his sleeves rolled to his elbows and his hands black from the work, and he stood at his daughter's shoulder and looked at Mr. Sorrel with the patient assessing look of a man weighing iron, and Mr. Sorrel, who had a great deal of experience of rooms and not very much of yards, climbed back into his trap and was driven away. Adrian Mowbray came that evening on foot from the inn. He had ridden as far as the crossroads and had walked the rest. He came into the yard with his hat in his hand and his coat dusty at the hem, and Tess, who saw him before he saw her, came out at once. I did not send him, he said. He did not greet her. He said it first, as the only thing that could be said first. You have my word. I learned of his coming an hour ago. He has been told. From this hour I will conduct what concerns us myself, and only myself, and you will hear nothing in this yard that does not come from my own mouth. I am very sorry. I believe you, Tess said. She did not say it warmly, but she said it. Come inside. My father will want to know. He came inside. He stood in the kitchen with his hat in his hand, like any visitor, and he told Jonas exactly what had been done, and exactly what he had done about it, and Jonas listened in the slow, patient way Jonas had. And when Adrian had finished, Jonas said only, I think you had better take a cup of something. You have walked a long way. Adrian took the cup. He sat in the chair where he had sat for a fortnight under another name. He drank the tea Tess had made. He looked at her across the table. He did not press her. He had said he would not press her, and he did not. He came every other day for 3 weeks, on foot from the inn. He never came in a carriage. He never sent a letter ahead. He simply came at an hour when she might be expected to be at the forge or in the garden, and he stood at the gate until she chose whether to come to him, and on the days she did not, he went away again. And on the days she did, they walked along the river path, or sat in the kitchen and talked of small things, and sometimes of large, and slowly, slowly, the ground that had not been level began, by some careful invisible work, to be leveled, not by his coming down to it, which was a thing he could not entirely do, nor by her going up to it, which was a thing she would not do, but by both of them agreeing, without saying so, to meet on a plane neither of them had previously occupied. The village knew. Of course the village knew. The carter had carried the talk before the second walk. The postboy had carried it after. Mrs. Arden, the housekeeper at Sefton, had heard it from a maid whose sister sold milk in the market, and had said only when pressed that his Grace's affairs were his Grace's affairs, and shut the conversation. It was a market day 6 weeks after the river, when he came at last in full sight of the village. He came on foot down the high street at mid-morning, in a plain dark coat and plain boots and no hat, with no servant attending and no horse held, and people stopped in the doorways of their shops to watch him pass, because no one in the parish had ever seen the Duke of Sefton on the high street on foot in his life. He went down to the forge. The forge door was open, the fire was up, and Jonas was at the anvil, and Tess was in the yard pumping water at the trough. Adrian Mowbray came into the yard. He stopped at the gate. By now 6 people had drifted down from the high street and stood at the wall, not pretending to do anything but watch, because watching was what was wanted of them, and they understood it. "Mr. Halsey," he said. His voice was quite even. "I have come to ask your daughter, in your hearing and in the hearing of any neighbor who wishes to stand and hear, whether she will allow me to court her in honest sight, with everything I am and everything I have known fully declared, and to decide, with all the time she requires, whether she will have me. I should like her answer in her own time. I have come on foot today because I had no right to come any other way." Jonas set down his hammer. The forge was very quiet. He looked at Tess across the yard. He did not speak. He had not spoken for her in any matter of consequence in 8 years, since the day she had told him she would not marry the corn factor's son because she did not love him, and he was not about to begin now. Tess set the pump handle down. She wiped her hands on her apron. She looked at Adrian Mowbray standing at the gate of her father's yard, with the village watching him from the wall, and she felt, somewhere beneath the careful weight of her anger and her tenderness and her pride, that quiet thing her mother had taught her to listen for, the thing that did not speak in words and did not need to. "You will wait," she said. "I will give you my answer in 3 days. I will not give it now. I will not give it because half the parish has come down to hear it." "I will wait 3 days," Adrian said. "I will wait 3 years if you require it. I came today because I had to be seen coming. I did not come for the answer." "Then go away again, please," Tess said, "and come back in 3 days, on foot, and I will tell you then." He bowed to her. He turned and he went back up the high street in plain sight, and the 6 at the wall went with him as far as the cross, where they peeled off in 2s and 3s to their kitchens to begin the long, careful work of repeating what they had seen. He came back in 3 days. He came on foot. She gave him her answer in the yard, in her father's hearing, and she gave it with one word, which was the word he had asked her to use. He took her hand very briefly. He did not embrace her. They had a great deal of time still to do. They were married in the parish church in the autumn. The bishop did not officiate. The parish vicar did, who had baptized her, and who read the words in his own thin, careful voice as he had read them at her mother's wedding 26 years before. There was talk in the county. There would always be talk. Adrian Mowbray did not manage it. He proceeded. Tess Halsey, as a duchess, was direct and practical, as she had been as a blacksmith's daughter, and this disconcerted exactly the people it ought to have done. She did not pretend she had been other than she had been. She received the women of the county who came to call, and she was civil to them, and she did not flatter them, and they went away from Sefton having had perhaps the only honest hour of their year. She kept her mother's books and read in the library in the evenings the way her father had read by the kitchen fire. Mrs. Arden, who had been at Sefton 30 years and had not expected to like the new duchess, found that she did, and was somewhat at a loss as to what to do with the affection. Mr. Petch, the steward, who had served 3 dukes and had not previously found his master's wives easy to consult, found that the present mistress understood drainage and tenants and the proper margin to leave a man before pressing him for rent. Mr. Sorrel stayed. The Duke did not dismiss him, but his authority was reduced to the management of accounts, and he never again represented the Duke of Sefton in any matter that touched a person, and he understood this, and he conducted himself accordingly, and was, in his own diminished way, a more honest man for the diminishing. Jonas Halsey continued at the forge. The estate took on no new arrangement with him. He refused it. He went on shoeing the village's horses and mending the village's gates, and on Sundays he walked up the lane to the great house and took his dinner in the small dining room with his daughter and his son-in-law, and was given the chair he preferred, and the food he preferred, and the silence he preferred at the moments he preferred it. He outlived his wife by 14 years. There were 2 children, a daughter first, named Alice for Tess's mother, who was small at birth and grew into a thin, determined girl with her grandfather's hands. Then a son, named Thomas for no one, because Tess and Adrian had agreed that he should be the first of his name in the family and not the latest of any. Both children were strong like their mother. Both could pump water at a trough by the age of 6. The son, in particular, found the forge irresistible from the moment he could walk, and was permitted, with such ceremony as Jonas chose to invent, to be his grandfather's assistant on Saturday mornings. He would, in time, hold a title. He would also shoe his own horse, because his grandfather had taught him, and because his father had said only, when first informed of the plan, that a duke who could not look at his horse's foot was a duke who deserved to be cheated by his groom. The Duke of Sefton still rode alone sometimes. He had not given it up. He never gave it up. But he did not ride out without telling his wife where he was going, and he did not ride in storms, and on the only occasion when he came home wet through, in his 60th year, from a sudden shower that had caught him on the south road, she put him by the fire and dried him and said nothing at all. And he understood, and was abashed in the small private way that long marriage permits, and did not do it again. The bridge was rebuilt the spring after the storm. The county paid for it. The freeholder on the eastern bank made the necessary contribution. Tess, who had walked over the new bridge for the first time on her father's arm one cold morning in March, asked, before she would walk over it a second time, that her father examine the ironwork himself. Jonas Halsey took an hour to do it. He climbed down to the abutments and tapped the brackets with the small hammer he kept in his coat for such things, and he stood under the central arch and looked up at the bolts that held the railing, and at last he came up onto the road and dusted off his hands and said the work was sound. He did not argue with the county surveyor about the matter. He did not need to. His daughter walked across the bridge a second time, and a third, and many times after, and she crossed it always with her father's word beneath her feet and not the surveyor's. A man may travel a long way without learning what he is. A woman may stay where she was born and know it from the beginning. The river had not been kind in the night it came down off the hills. It had taken a bridge that had stood for 40 years and a horse that had served a man well. But it had given something it had not meant to give, a stranger who needed nursing and a woman who could nurse, and a fortnight in which neither of them was less than the other. And out of that fortnight, by long patient work and the long undoing of a deception that had been kindly meant and was not less a deception for it, a marriage that lasted, and a forge that lasted, and a county that learned to speak of the Duchess at Sefton with the particular respect reserved for women who have not condescended to be improved. They arrive here, like a stranger pulled from a river and brought home whenever they are ready.